What was originally supposed to be David Zawada taking on Sergey Khandozhko is now turned into a short notice replacement fight for Alex Morono, one of the most consistently inconsistent fighters in the UFC. And I have to say, Matt, I have this circled as one of 3 possible fight of the nights. These guys absolutely show up to show out, and both of these guys match up very well stylistically. For David Zawada, from the opening minute, he might look a little tired. He does get pretty puffy when he gets hit, and you hate to see that in a guy because you have to wonder how that factors into a judge's decision at the end of the day. But if you look at it for Zawada so far in the UFC, not the sexiest of records at 1-3. He had a fight of the night in his debut against Danny Roberts. He got knocked out with the body kick by Li Jingliang. He earns a performance bonus against Abubakar Nurmagomedov where he gets on his back and then submits him, which was kind of crazy. And then he loses split decision to Ramzan Ameev, a guy that just never goes away when you fight him. And I get upset when he fights because he thinks he's a kickboxer. Just wrestle everybody, Ramzan, and maybe you can make it all the way up to the top at 170 pounds. But I said it from the hot mat. Alex Morono, consistently inconsistent. The 5-on-in. He beats Max Griffin in a war, which is crazy. He gets knocked out by a flurry of punches against Chaos Williams. He beats Reese McKee pillar to post, 30-27 the whole time. He loses to Anthony Pettis where he gets out-pressured the entire fight. And then he knocks out Cowboy Cerrone 3 months ago, and he looks like the world's his oyster. It's just a weird run. Both of these guys have earned performance bonuses throughout their tenure in the UFC, and since about 2000 and let's say 18, have been some of the more exciting guys to watch in this division. I love this fight from a pure stylistic standpoint because I think Zawada would have beaten Khandozhko, who was away for a long time, had a few injuries to heal up. I had Zawada in that fight. Now against Morono, and I won't tip my hand, but he's now an underdog in this fight, so that makes it all the more interesting.
I don't feel like I'm speaking out of terms when I say this. This feels a little bit like a step back for Alex Morono. At least after the Cowboy fight, I really thought that Morono was going to get at least a borderline top 15 guy, or maybe a Matt Brown, maybe a Miguel Baeza, like bigger names, people along those lines. I didn't think he'd be fighting David Zawada on short notice of all things. And the good thing about Alex Morono is he's one of those fighters. He's always kind of ready to fight no matter who the opponent is. He really is known for, okay, hey, we need some guy at 170 pounds. Is Alex Morono ready? And he always is.
Well, Morono probably went, you know what, and this was announced before, but Ricky Tercios, you train with me? I'm your coach, buddy? Now it's my turn to take
Exactly. And that's the good thing about Alex Morono. We talk about this with guys like Michael Johnson. There's a lot of fighters. Michael Case is another guy. Alex Morono is always in the gym, and whether it's either working on his own skill set or his own teammates, it's just something that you do really appreciate from Alex Morono, and that's the thing I do like from him. He does struggle, and I'll get to the consistently inconsistent bit, but I really think Alex Morono just struggles with speed in his fights. I do think faster opponents give him trouble because he can overwhelm most guys with his volume. Power-wise, I don't think he's the most powerful striker in the world. Again, most of his power shots are because he just throws 100 punches at you, and one of those 100, if they do land in the right place, can rock you. That's why I think when people look at Alex Morono and they look at the last fight against Cowboy Cerrone, that's kind of like buying Alex Morono's stock at its peak. That's like Bitcoin at like what? I don't know what high Bitcoin is, but that's like buying Bitcoin when it's really high before it crashes. I think Alex Morono can get knockouts at the UFC level, but I don't think he's the type of guy who can go out there, head kick opponents, then finish them up against the cage like he did against Cowboy. I do think a lot of the time it is that pound the rock mentality, to quote Doris Burke, and he is a fighter who can get it done that way. Look at the Reese McKee fight. Reese McKee is kind of like Ferris Ziem. He's got the weirdest frame ever for the weight class. He's this huge fighter, very rangy, but Alex Morono made it an ugly fight. He got on the inside all the time. He used uppercuts. He made it a very ugly fight. It was a great fight to watch, but his style made it very ugly. He made it more of a war of attrition than it was just a war of skill sets, and that's why this fight against Zawada is weird. Zawada coming off a loss, and I know maybe beating Cowboy doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people anymore, but still, that's a big name, and the UFC is a company that is trying to build contenders and build names. That's why I'm kind of surprised Morono is in this one.
Well, if you look at it for Zawada, he was training for Khandozhko, who's a good striker. He pushes a decent pace. He has terrible wrestling, so that's the one knock on. Good grappling, but bad in terms of takedown defense. His offense is pretty good. His defense is pretty bad. If you've never seen Sergey Khandozhko, I can't fault you because the guy's hardly ever fought in the UFC, but he is a decent litmus test, especially where Zawada coming into a camp, getting ready for Morono. It's a fairly similar fighter. It's like a 1B, now 1A. And for Zawada, you might have seen it before. He's trained at a UFC gym in the past. It's got to be awkward because he's got a loss way back when to Boris Mankovsky, who has been in the corner of Mateusz Gamrot, who now trains with David Zawada, so there's a whole ATT connection. And you talk about that. Morono's a guy that corners a lot of people. We've seen David Zawada corner some people as well. And since moving to ATT, you throw out some of those names he's been training with: Santiago Ponzinibbio, Omari Akhmedov, Yaroslav Amasov. Some pretty good names of guys to train with, especially for a fight like this. So I talked about it, the odds. I was kind of surprised that Alex Morono opened to minus 205 favorite. He's a minus 179 right now. For Zawada, open to plus 165. He's a plus 149 right now. I haven't seen the Tapology votes. I'm either going to be surprised or not at all. I'm surprised. 316 total votes, 82% Morono, 73% by decision. For the 18% that have Zawada, 72% by decision. This fight's going to come down to a couple of different keys. Alex Morono has kind of a similar opponent game plan already in place. When he fought Max Griffin, he was able to beat Griffin. I think a fight against Zawada is very similar. For Zawada, that fight against Danny Roberts was really close. The fight that he beat Abubakar Nurmagomedov in, that was a huge Hail Mary of a surprise. And then other than that, I mean, you look at the other losses. Li Jingliang, body shot knockout. That's a flash thing. That's going to happen. Ramazan Ameev was tough for even top 15 guys to beat. So it really is tricky to try and get your bearings on Zawada in the UFC. So what are you thinking here? Because I know we kind of leaned each way. Just over in the overall analysis, I think Alex Morono's a very complete guy. He's got a Taekwondo background. He's got a Jiu-Jitsu background. Zawada has decent kickboxing. He's very well-rounded as well. That's why I think that on paper, this one matches up well stylistically. So who are you taking here?
Morono might have the Taekwondo background, but he still fights primarily like a kickboxer. He's not somebody who throws a lot of spinning techniques. He just sets up his kicks with his hands, and he does it to great effect. That's not why I think Alex Morono is going to be able to get this done. I know it's on short notice, but this is one of the few fighters that I actually have some level of confidence with coming in on short notice. He's done it before. He is one of those guys. I'm sure Dana White probably has like a very short list of guys where he's like, listen, they might not have a big Instagram following. They might not be household names.
Carlos Ulberg.
No, but they put on good fights when I call them, and they show up to fight when I do call them. And Alex Morono is one of those guys. I think if he is able to get the win over David Zawada, it is going to be on the feet. Because the thing about Zawada is he's so tricky on the mat if he is able to get that takedown. I just don't think he's going to get the opportunity to get Morono down to the mat. And that's why it's going to be primarily a striking battle between the two. And it's hard to pick against Morono in that.
Morono's wins. Derek Krantz, Kyle Noak, one of Matt's favorite fighters. Who is it?
James Butasery.
Great fighter. He's got that weird fight against Nico Price. He beat Josh Berkman, Sung Kanon, Zach Otto, Max Griffin, Reese McKee, Donald Cerrone. Reese McKee was just one of those not ready for primetime players like on Saturday Night Live. I'll ever so slightly go with Alex Morono, but again, David Zawada has been getting ready for a fighter very similar to Morono. He's kind of in a nothing to lose when no one knows your name type situation where in the UFC, it hasn't been great. 1-3, you have to think with another loss. That's probably it for Zawada. Though he is an all-action fighter and he has 2 performance bonuses to his name, I'm ever so slightly going with Alex Morono to buck the old Randa Marcos trend of win-loss, win-loss, and I think Morono's going to be able to get his second win in a row. So ever so slightly going with Morono. Not necessarily in love with the odds. I think they're going to get a little bit closer as the week goes on, and I can't wait to see these guys face off on Friday. So this could be one that switches on question mark kicks, but I'm going with Morono here. You've got great weight as well.
Yeah, I like the volume out of him, and his counter wrestling is quite good. I think if this fight does stay on the feet, he has at least a lasting presence throughout 15 minutes, and we've seen him have an extremely high output throughout 15 minutes. It's not like he can only get to the final bell because he's throwing single shots. This is a guy who moves forward a lot in his fights and throws in combination, and that's why it's so hard to beat Morono by decision. That's why I like Morono in this one.
I think Zawada has a great opportunity in this one, maybe more so than the 18% that have voted with him. Let's hear it from you down below in the comments section. Who do you have between Zawada and Morono? Can't wait for it. We're both going with Morono. Big time fight card. You got the debut of Mandy Boom. She's going to be taking on Ariane Lipski. Then you've got Aspinall, who's taking on Spivac, and in the main event, Brunson. Till you're not going to want to miss. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say, let's get into it.